Our students have not been able to come today. Our students have not been able to come today because they're going through difficult times. We are, in fact, living through black times, and I know how difficult it has been for any of us to do any work at all, especially this last week after the murderous attack on JNU students and faculty. But I've spent the last 1 week on the miraculous streets of Bangalore, taken over by the young in their thousands in support of JNU, and that's been really very heartening. Thank you all very much for coming today to attend this very special panel discussion organized by the Swasthya Abhiyan. Since we love acronyms, the JSA came to be formed in India prior to the launch of the People's Health Movement in Dhaka in 2000. It comprises organizations such as the Center of Social and Community Health in JNU, NGOs such as Sehat, Sama, Delhi Science Forum, movements such as the Narmada Bachao Andolan and the All India Democratic Women's Association, and individuals. The JSA, through research and advocacy, has over the years intervened on a number of issues in health policy. For example, international law and drugs, globalization and health, women's health issues, and campaign for the right to food and against privatization and commercialization of healthcare. Professor Shiela Zurbrigg's book, Raku's Story, must have been read by everyone in Swasthya Abhiyan. This wonderful book, sadly not in print, looks at India's healthcare system, commencing with the story of Raku, a landless agricultural laborer in Tamil Nadu. Raku has reasons to avoid the public health services. They do not provide medical care when she needs it, but attempt to capture her for sterilization. She does not want to be sterilized since she is not certain her children will survive. When her baby gets diarrhea, she sells the only brass pot in her house to buy medical care from a quack. The quack injects the baby with a sedative and the diarrhea does come down for a day, only to wreck her. She borrows money and a lot of courage and takes a bus to Chennai for the first time, full of fear. As she reaches the government hospital, the baby dies. The doctor shouts at her for being ignorant and not coming in time for help. Zurbrigg asks the question, who is ignorant about what? And proceeds to analyze the structural roots of ill health and disease. Shiela Zurbrigg is a medical doctor who worked with the smallpox program in India and also at Ramnad district in Tamil Nadu. Raku was her friend. Subsequently, armed with a master's in public health degree, she worked as an adjunct professor at the Department of History, Dalhousie University, Nova Scotia, Canada, where she worked on the health history of South Asia. She was also a visiting professor at our center in JNU, where we jointly taught a course on health history. Shiela took time off for several years from her academic involvements to head the international campaign against sanctions following the US invasion of Iraq. Had it not been for this, we would have had her 2 books earlier. Thank you, Shiela, for being with us. We have a distinguished panel today. In typical JNU fashion, none of the panelists sent me their short bios in time, so I've had to sort of create it on my own. I did get some later. Professor Imrana Qadeer was a pediatrician at AIIMS before JNU and public health beckoned her. She joined the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health in 1973 and helped create the academic program in the center. She was also my PhD supervisor and had last count supervised 19 PhD degrees, apart from publishing extensively. I mean, I don't think she needs an introduction at all. Professor Neeladri Bhattacharya has a reputation for being one of the best teachers in JNU, and I'm grateful he's here. The beauty of JNU was that we could work across rigid academic boundaries. Neil and I were joint supervisors of an MPhil dissertation by Leela Sami entitled Gender Differentials in Famine Mortality, Madras 1876 and Punjab 1896. Leela went on to develop this into a PhD thesis in the UK. Neil's most recent work, described as a classic in agrarian history in the EPW, is The Agrarian Conquest, the Colonial Reshaping of a Rural World, Permanent Black 2018. And I must say, Neil, it's not just his reputation, he is one of the best dancers in JNU. Professor Prabhu Mahapatra, labor historian, teaches at Delhi University. He has worked on diverse aspects of global history, labor history, from indentured labor in the tea gardens of colonial Assam to Indian immigrant labor in the West Indies. He has been a visiting professor at the universities of Göttingen, Humboldt, and Cambridge. We last met on the streets of Delhi on the 19th of December. Welcome to all of you. Shiela Zurbrigg's work that we are discussing today is so important that it would have to lead to a rewriting of the economic history of India from those gods in Cambridge. But are they listening? For the demographic history in the influential economic history of India is deeply influenced by Kingsley Davis's reading of it. This is completely and utterly undermined by Zurbrigg in this masterful work. Conventional wisdom on health history in India, led by that cold warrior Kingsley Davis, in his influential work, The Population of India and Pakistan, still, I suspect, taught as gospel in population studies, was as follows. The death rate declined in the West due to wide-ranging socio-economic changes. Following a period, birth rates also declined due to these same socio-economic factors, despite the absence of contraception, then banned. This was, of course, the conventional demographic transition history. In India, on the other hand, Kingsley Davis argued, death rates had declined due to medical intervention. What he called death control technologies had brought down the death rates. Since the requisite socio-economic change had not occurred, a population explosion was on the horizon. This therefore called for bringing in population control technologies, for population growth would be an insurmountable impediment to socio-economic development. This is, of course, the conventional neo-Malthusian understanding of the population question. The death control technology Davis referred to was malaria control through quinine distribution, commencing in the 1920s. The problem with this reading of demographic history is that Davis produced no data at all to substantiate his argument. Just his stature and anti-communist zeitgeist of 1950s made his views accepted knowledge. Zurbrigg observes the decline in death rates in India is noted in a comparison of the censuses of 1921 and 1931. This is when population begins to grow in the subcontinent. We might note, however, with surprise that population growth had been identified in the very first census of 1881 as an explanation for poverty in India, 50 years before population actually grew. The major disease contributing to the appalling death rates was fever, i.e. malaria. Weakened by Want is not just a major work of history, rewriting conventional health and demographic history, it is also revolutionary in helping us to understand disease causation, bringing back the forgotten role of hunger in history, strengthening what is called a McKeevanite analysis of epidemiological history. As Thomas McKeevan revealed for England and Wales, the 19th century decline of death rates had little to do with either curative medicine or even preventive health. Broader socio-economic change, better living conditions, rise in real wages, and freedom from hunger were the underlying causes. In other words, strengthening an understanding of health that is sensitive to social, economic, and political factors, and this is the book that we are going to be discussing. Thank you very much. Imrana, should I call upon you first?
I just want to thank you because I've had a glimpse of the kind of labor you put in when you were working on this, and the running around from archive to archive, crossing borders, searching data. And the product of that labor is this. I haven't brought my copy, but here it is. And it's a fascinating book. And now the second one is also out. I must confess, I still have to read the second one thoroughly before commenting on it, so I'm confining myself to the first book. Why I think it's fascinating is something that Shiela has already talked about. She's talked about how in history the approach to understanding diseases has shifted from a more broad-based comprehensive political economy perspective to narrower technological perceptions of disease. And what she's writing about is one specific disease and how it teaches us about this transition. Interestingly, if you look back in history, there are people, doctors, epidemiologists, in the 19th century, like Farr, who worked with the registration sections in the UK and has done extensive, considered as the father of statistics, medical statistics. And his comment was that hunger is not only important as far as the registration of death and disease is concerned, it's also one of the most important underlying factor that causes disease. Because, and he talks a lot about the kind of diseases which are associated with undernutrition. There have been many people who have written and worked on this association of poverty and disease. We have Marmot, we have Wilkinson, but their work looks at poverty and therefore tries to look at a conglomerate of factors which work together, and nutrition being one of them. But there are those who have worked on nutrition itself. And this book is very critical today because it is helping us to look back on South Asia and how that global shift, which is very eminent from broad-based understanding of disease to the technocentric biomedical view of disease, how it has acted in South Asia. If I go back to the 30s, Rockefeller Foundation was extensively working in South Asia and working on health and diseases. And in 1935, around 35, when this conference took place, they presented at Bandung two people from Rockefeller. One was Selskar Gun, who had worked in China, and the other person was John Grant, who had worked in India. And they presented extensive proposals to improve health in these countries based on a comprehensive plan of going in for food supplies, environmental sanitation, education, health, etc., etc. And what is very interesting is that at Bandung, and these were younger researchers and workers of the Rockefeller Foundation itself. And what is interesting is that the head of the Rockefeller, which was Paul Russell, redirected the debate and pushed for a technocentric approach. And that is how we have shifted in South Asia. And if you look at all communicable disease controls, the entire approach has been technocentric. It's not that only the so-called experts, international experts, were responsible. I think the Indian planners were equally responsible. Though we talk of Bhore Committee as the first effort to look comprehensively at health, a major weakness was that we excluded health from the overall developmental policy. And Bhore Committee imagined a beautiful future, assuming that the rest of the development will happen. And it didn't happen like that. And therefore, since health was looked at exclusively, it was easy for the experts to give it a technocentric shift. Now, having said that, I want to come back to this book, which very forcefully makes the point that food supplies, destitution, scarcity underlie the disease process. And the evidence lies embedded in history itself. If you look at the medical knowledge or the biomedical knowledge today, you will find a huge amount of data which is telling us how your body, your immune systems operate, and if they are not healthy enough, how they cause diseases. I'm sorry to be a little medical in this, but I think it's important because, you all know diarrhea is so frequently associated with malnutrition. Why? Because malnutrition physically affects our digestive systems. It destroys the intestines, it destroys the absorptive process. So it affects you physically. It affects you at the immune level because your system loses the sensibility to perceive and make the distinction between nutrients and microbes. It affects because it promotes biochemical mechanisms which enhance inflammatory processes. It affects because in your body you fight disease not only through immunoglobulins but also through very specialized cells. And there's a cell called T cell which essentially controls those processes. And malnutrition suppresses the working of T cells. And the most contemporarily argued case is the nutritional effect on epigenetic influence. It doesn't change your genes, but it in a way affects that the expression of genes is limited, it's restricted. It changes your biochemical processes. And that's why when a mother is malnourished, when a baby is malnourished over a period of time, even if they come out fit, their systems are distorted, and that is leading to the association between a lot of diseases. Today we are talking about the modern diseases, hypertension, diabetes, blood pressure, this, that, and the other, and all of it is related to this, undernutrition amongst mothers, amongst newborns. So today there's a whole lot of knowledge of this linkage. Oh, what is very interesting is that at the policy level, there is a total blank. And this linkage between nutrition and disease is not paid attention. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to say so, but the Indian nutritionists are too busy talking of micronutrients alone and not paying attention to very high levels of undernutrition that persists in this country. And it's almost assumed that we have won the fight because we don't have third-degree malnutrition, undernutrition, and just focus on giving zinc and at best iron. Iron, of course, we need very badly, but they will continue talking of vitamins and zinc and what have you, but not talk of food. So, in that kind of an environment, Shiela adds to the effort that this kind of change has to be brought in, and that the academics should focus on the real problem of how undernutrition enhances disease processes. Now, you know, I must confess that reading Sheila's book is very challenging because she mobilizes so much data. She just bombards you with data and evidence and statistics, and I'm saying this, if there are any students, don't feel scared, don't feel discouraged. Read it 3 times. I read it twice, and I'm telling you, because you have to get into her data to grasp the truth of what she's talking about. And the book is also fascinating because you can read it in so many ways. You know, the first thing that strikes me is the story of this young British Army medical officer who's come to India, and he goes to Doha, he's working there. He goes to Myanmar and he's working there. A few months back I went there and I passed and there was this board, Myanmar. I was so excited. And then, I mean, I'm not going into it, but what I'm saying is that there is this story of this young man who comes here and he does some excellent, intensive investigation. And he presents it, and he underlines the fact that it is weakened by want, are his words. It is destitution, it is hunger. And he had the courage to do that and present it in an official seminar. And though what he said was not included in the first published report, and as Sheila tells us, it was published only in 1911, and also it was kind of tuned to, you know, lessen the impact of how he presented it. But he did this. You can also, for students of public health and for me, also, although we all read about the famines, about Bengal famine, and we read Amartya Sen, but you know, the kind of details Sheila presents to you of the famine codes, the 2 famine codes, how they changed from just a kind of relief to a preventive approach, which makes a huge amount of difference. And the details and her excerpts from various reports and commissions, and it's really extremely interesting, Sheila. And it brings alive those times. And for me, I think those chapters are very important. The book, if I might say so, has an introduction, of course, which sets the framework. And then she goes into the malaria epidemic and its different dimensions. She looks at the programs and policies of the colonial government, and then into the famine control and over time. And that is then followed by a discussion. Now, important thing is the methodology that she uses. I think it's very impressive, and that's what I want to underline, because she first tells us about Christopher's work in great detail and his thesis, as I've already shared. And then she examines that thesis. And her examination of that thesis is so detailed. And in that process, she not only reaffirms some of the conclusions that he comes out with, but she also improves upon them. And she does so by using better methodologies. Of course, because she's working now, she had the advantage of having statistical methods at her disposal, which she can use. But I think the most interesting and critical thing was that Shiela disaggregates the provincial level data into district level data. And through that then brings out the intricacies of the relationships of the rainfall, malaria mortality, crops, prices, regional variations, and entomology, and a host of other factors. Now, in doing this, I think what she has shown, what she does is that 1908 is the epidemic that Christopher writes about. And Christopher's own work goes back in history. And it is that period that she covers from 1867 or 68 to 1908. And then from 1908, another 40 years. And then she compares. And what she brings out very clearly is that it was only after 1910 that you find that the malaria mortality starts declining, and between 20 and 40, it has come down to 1/3 of pre-1908 epidemic rates. And that very clearly shows that it is the implementation of an improved preventive famine code which has influenced the declines. And interestingly, finish, don't mind. She then also looks at the 1940 onwards, from 1940 to 1960. And what is very interesting is that because of the partition, the lab cohesing, what she does is she looks at crude death rates, and then she shows, because it incorporates malaria, she shows how the crude death rates have come down after 40s and she matches it with the DDT sprays. And what she shows is that the declines in the crude death rates are a overall phenomenon over the 11 districts that she had comparable data, whereas the actual programmatic interventions came only in 1953. And the actual declines came earlier. And then what she shows is that there is a much greater correlation between the mortality declines and the economic interventions. Interventions like, first the post-war reconstruction, and then the whole introduction of food price controls and ration systems. So through different ways, another thing that she does is, of course, she mobilizes data from other parts of the country, like Bengal, and compares and shows that this, what is happening in Punjab is not the exception, but you can have similar experiences from elsewhere. So the key learning that she underlines is that Christopher talked of rain, malaria mortality, and food prices, whereas she talks of hunger, food prices, and mortality. And her point being that rain can cause destruction and therefore destitution, and rain also causes transmission. And therefore, to separate famine mortality and malaria mortality is not possible. But this is what the British did exactly. They used Christopher's work to isolate malaria mortality and said this we can handle through the sanitarian approach, although they ignored even that, and just let it happen in the urban areas through chlorine and through flood controls. The whole issue of undernutrition and malnutrition was separated. They did tackle it through famine control, through famine codes, but in the history of malaria, that is where the dissociation took place. And this is so well done, Sheila, that I am really thankful to you for putting this out. I do want to raise a few questions and some things that I myself need clarification. One small thing maybe, but you have one thing that you have done which is very crucial is that you have looked at the atypical epidemics. You mentioned 10 atypical epidemics, and you show that actually those 10 atypical epidemics are actually falling into the same category of destitution and scarcity. So it is not the rain, but destitution and scarcity, whether it is because of the war and its impact and inflations, or it is because of the preceding droughts. So I just want to ask you, you mentioned 1917, but in the details, I don't find 1917 in that chapter, and I want to know why. The second small thing that I want to say that in the 1970
Punjab famine. She said Punjab scarcity. Malaria.
The second thing that I want to ask you is that you have extensive data on food grain prices, but the source of the food grain prices are different. You know, there are three different sources that you have used, and I'm just wondering, does that in any way affect the trend? And shouldn't one say that? I'm just wondering, and I would like you to comment on that. The third thing that I want to say is that you talk of undernutrition and malnutrition, and you treat malnutrition as undernutrition. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that because I see it as a scale. Undernutrition is clear calorie deficiency, and it could be severity, it could be extent, whatever. But malnutrition includes obesity, because we in our work are finding that while at the policy level we are being told that we are overeating and obesity is increasing, we have shown that the obese Indian women are actually malnourished women. So I need to make that distinction, and I would like to know your comment. And my last request is that when you bring out the second edition of your book, Sheila, when you do the maps, please label the provinces, because I had to hunt for an old map of that period to locate, because when I want to understand your data and the way you are clustering it, I want to look in the map, and I don't find which district, because the names are kind of slightly, boundaries have slightly changed, and it's different. So that's it, and thank you so much for writing.